Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And this is Ellen coming to you from the beautiful tropical island of St. Bart's, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, it's Stan in Gainesville, Florida, where we had this beautiful swamp. And today, we're going to discuss top shelf consoles, light and health, OLO, what about the conductor, and subtle visibility, all on Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California.
How long is it?
It's long. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers
And Sister?
That's right.
I want to say
Ellen.
and sister sometimes. And
Oh,
sister.
no, you don't get to say it.
Why not? Why not?
Because I'm the sister.
You're only a sister on Thursday nights, Stan, okay?
Oh,
that's it, all right? You and I go out, we do our Women on the Town night on Thursday
We get our
nights.
wigs on, you know.
Girls on the Town, there you go.
my
Okay,
nail
welcome
polish
everyone
on.
to episode 421. And we have the whole Lumen family here, well, most of the Lumen family here. And we have a lot of things to talk about today. But first, we have some industry news. That's right. And this is breaking news. This is so breaking that even Stan didn't know about it. So he's going to hear it for the very first time with you right now on Light Talk.
Because I haven't been able to read my email for 3 days.
That's
so
right.
I've
He's
been
like
busy.
taking a complete break from technology.
I was out of pocket.
Matter of fact, he walked. He's not using his Tesla. He's actually walking now. He's got a horse and buggy, right? You got a horse and buggy
Thank God.
I love horses.
there. Okay. All right. So here's the breaking news. The BBC is reporting that scientists claim to have discovered a new color no one has ever seen before.
Did they talk to all the people on the planet? They talked to the billions of people and asked them, they show them a flashcard?
That's right. They had the flashcard. They said, I've never seen that color before. It is on the internet. We will give you a link on the Light Talk Facebook group page. Okay? But let me just read this. A team of scientists claim to have discovered a new color no human has ever seen before. The research follows an experiment in which researchers in the U.S. had laser pulses fired into their eyes. By stimulating specific cells in the retina, the participants claim to have witnessed a blue-green color that scientists have called OLO. That's O-L-O. But some experts have said the existence of a new color is open to argument. The findings, published in the Journal of Science Advances on Friday, has been described by the study's co-author, Professor Ren Ng from the University of California, as remarkable. He and his colleagues believe that the results could potentially further research into color blindness. Professor Ng, who is one of the 5 people to take part in the experiment, told BBC Radio 4's Today's program on Saturday that OLO was more saturated than any color that you could see in the real world. This is a quote. Let's say you go around your whole life and you see only pink, baby pink, and pastel pink. And then one day you go to the office and someone's wearing a shirt and it's the most intense baby pink you've ever seen. And they say it's a new color and we call it red. The retina induces cone cells, which are cells responsible for perceiving color. There are 3 types of cone cells, and Stan knows all this stuff. Actually, we all know this. S, L, and M. Each one is sensitive different wavelengths of blue, red, and green, respectively. According to the research paper, in normal vision, any light that stimulates an M cone cell must also stimulate its neighboring L or S cones, because its function overlaps with them. However, in the study, the laser only stimulated M cones, which in principle would send a color signal to the brain that never occurs in natural vision. This means that the color OLO could not be seen by a person's naked eye in the real world without the help of specific stimulation. To verify the color observed during the experiment, each participant adjusted a controllable color dial until it matched OLO. Professor John Barber, a vision scientist at City St. George's, University of London, who was not involved in the study, said that while the research is a technological feat in stimulating selective cone cells, the discovery of a new color is open to argument. He explained that if, for example, the red cone cells were stimulated in large numbers, people would perceive a deep red, but the perceived brightness may change depending on changes in red cone sensitivity, which is not unlike what happened in this study. But the study's co-author, Professor Ng, admitted that although OLO is certainly very difficult to see, The team is studying the findings to see what it could possibly mean for colorblind people who find it difficult to distinguish between certain colors. Isn't that amazing?
Amazing.
I'm really looking forward to reading this, so now I have some weekend homework. So about maybe when I was sort of really deep, going in deep on vision science years back, doing all the museum work, there was another study that was basically postulating that because your low, medium, and high frequency cones are broad-based, in other words, they're not specific. It's a pretty wide frequency band that they get, and there's overlap, of course, between them. That if you developed a light source using laser, which maybe I'm curious to read this, and you stimulated just the peak of the waveform, not the whole waveform, but if you stimulated the peak of the low, medium, and high, you would get full spectrum. So in other words, basically saying you don't need a full spectrum light source to experience full spectrum light. You just need to stimulate the peak of the trichromatic clones. And I guess this is sort of a carry forward on that concept and the notion that you would be able to perceive something based on very, very narrow band stimulation, because the sensor is not narrow band, but stimulating its peak response. Really interesting. I can't wait to read the paper. Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and they're talking about it. You can't see it with normal vision. The cones in your eye need to be stimulated by a laser.
Right, and that's the point. And because, as you've pointed out many times, David, color vision is opponent. So it's not that you see red, it adds up the pluses and minuses. So it's how little green you're actually sensing that gives you the red sensation, or how little red, it's the plus and minuses of the two cones that is what the brain perceives as the color, because you need both. And so the fact that, and they are next to each other. So I can't wait to read it. Sounds fun. Can we post that for the listeners?
We will post it. And the interesting thing is they show the actual color, and it's like a light blue-green. It's like a light teal, but it's extremely saturated. That's the closest they've gotten to it, which I find kind of interesting. That's a blue-green, my favorite color, of course.
The other guy's point, who's sort of saying, is being a little bit contrary in that the brightness matters, because there's this linkage between color perception and brightness, and they're not separate. So the perception of color is stimulation dependent, intensity dependent, regardless of the chroma.
There's another thing, too, which is the people who need cataract surgery are not seeing the same color as the people who don't. So
That's
you could
right.
be sitting in a theater next to someone who's going, oh, my God, Stan, that color is awfully muddy.
Color.
And you might turn to them and say, do you need cataract surgery? It looks perfect to me.
Well, that's the yellowing of the lens, which is a whole other
Right.
factor. In fact, Pam is going in we get back from Germany for us, and the doctor's already warned her that when you first get the first eye done, and maybe, I think, Steve, you were talking about this, right? You get the first eye done, and the whole world is so much bluer than you thought, because it happens gradually, and then until you get the other one done, you're seeing two different color temperatures. But that's just the yellowing of the lens as
Right,
part of the cataract
exactly.
process.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why you should always wear sunglasses when you go outside. It retards it.
Oh, I wear UV I wear the best lenses I
Yep,
can afford.
absolutely.
Take care of your eyes, boys and girls.
You only get
Yep.
one pair.
That's right.
You only get one body, one
That's
mind.
right. And my mind is gone, and my body's almost gone as well. But let's get started with the show. Ellen has our first question. What, Steve, what?
Whoa. News from
News
Texas.
Wait a
from
second. We've got
Texas.
news from Texas. Yeehaw!
Giddy up, comrade.
According to Full Compass Systems, I got the email today. Full Compass says that GenLight, they're a business unit of Signify, which is a unit of Philips. They're going to start raising their LED prices. GenLight handles architecture, landscape, and they say pedestrian lighting. So these tariffs, we're going to start seeing this change at Home Depot, maybe before we ever see it in entertainment lighting. Entertainment lighting, people are trying to buy every part they can get to fix this before they really get hit. But GenLight, look for prices to go up. Also, second little bit of news from Texas. A kangaroo wearing a red sports coat was recently seen hopping down the streets of Dallas. It was captured and returned to its owner without incident. And that's the news from Texas. You're just jealous because you guys have iguanas and alligators and monkeys.
All right, let's move on to our show. Ellen, you got the first question.
I do. Sandy from Atlanta would like to know, what is the best way to light the orchestra pit, and what about the conductor? Well, in my experience, the best thing to do is to use top light and high angles, anything that keeps the light out of the musician's eyes. They need to be able to look at the conductor without any light getting in their way, and they need to be able to see their music. So there are little lights that go on the music stands. Now, I've noticed lately that some orchestras are using iPads for their music. So they have been able to do away with the music stand lights because the orchestra is sort of self-lit. I also think that it's a good idea to keep the foot candles or lumens low. I don't know if there's a legal limit, Stan, but you certainly don't want to see a bright abyss in front of the carefully lit opera or orchestra or ballet or musical, right?
Well, I've been battling orchestras for decades in the opera world.
Right.
Everything you said is correct, Ellen. The angle, not only must it be high, it also can't be in the eyes of the conductor or the eyes of the player.
Right.
It can't throw a shadow onto the music. So a lot of times when especially lighting the conductor, you want to come straight down and you want to make sure that it is cut sharply to the music stand and also to the conductor's arms, however far they go out, so that the orchestra and the singers can see the conductor conducting. So that's very important. And I will teach you another Gilbert lesson. And we should have a little section called Lessons from Gilbert. And this is one of them. Always have two lights lighting the conductor. And make sure that those two lights are circuited separately, and they should have separate power sources. Because if one should fail, the other one's still going. Because if you only have one and that goes out, guess what happens if it goes out? The whole thing comes to a stop.
Right. They can't see him.
They can't see, and the singers can't see him, and no one can see him. Also, there are monitors on stage of the conductor in case the singer is looking stage right during a scene. They can see the conductor in the wings because there are monitors. So you got to make sure that the light balance is correct for the camera as well. That's another important thing.
Also, for piano keys, you want to light straight down also, so there's no shadows or anything on those.
All that stuff. You should come straight down on it and never have light leaking into the pit. If you have let's say you're doing a backlight system and someone's far downstage and the angle is going to take it into the pit, don't do it. Cut it right to the edge of the pit. You don't want any light going into the pit.
But is there a minimum limit of lumens or foot candles to walk around in there?
It's amazing how well musicians can see. Now, they want their music stands at full. But sometimes we take them down to 80%. And that's another thing you may want to consider is putting all the orchestra stand lights on a dimmer so that you can do complete blackouts at the end of the act. Because a lot of times you're going to end on a blackout. And if you don't dim the orchestra lights, then it's not going to be a blackout. It's just not, light's going to bounce, it's going to go on stage, you're going to see people running off stage and stuff like that. So you got to make sure you warn everybody, and you got to make sure that cue's not taken until after the music stops. So if it's exactly, you can't take that cue because no one can see, and then the poor conductor's out there, and the orchestra can't see the music. It's a total disaster. So make sure that it's like a beat right there. If it's a bump, then that's easy, okay? Bump, out, right? But if it's like a fade down, you may not want to fade that orchestra down with the rest of the set. You just want to follow it down when the music ends. So those are all good rules of thumb for when it comes to lighting orchestras.
I just lit a new facility for orchestra with Schuler Shook doing the architecture on it. And they asked me to have a minimum of 110 foot candles reflecting off the floor because the orchestra had asked that they want to play without music stand lights. So I did 110-foot candles off the floor. Orchestra was perfectly happy. They're not in a pit; they're in a facility that is for one thing. But I had never heard that. I didn't know that, and that seems to have worked quite well for them.
And for those who think that they want to color the light, I would say it's best to keep with a warm 3200 Kelvin type of color. A lot of times the conductor is higher than the orchestra themselves, the musicians, and you see the conductor and it's a cool scene, or the opera is mostly cool, then I'll go to a cooler color, but it'll be something like a 201 or something like that. So it's still a white light, and you don't want to screw that up. And you want to talk to the conductor if the conductor is having an issue with it. If it's a conductor I've worked with before, they know that I'm going to do it in a certain way, and they're fine. But sometimes the conductor will come into you and say, it's really too bright. It's too blinding for me. Then take it down, then dim it down a bit. There's nothing wrong with that.
Ellen was asking about, is there a recommended metric, if IES has one for light on a sheet of music on the music stand? I don't think there is. Steve's point about having a certain foot candle incidence on a floor of 110, depending upon what the floor material is. If it's black, the reflectivity is going to be pretty low. If it's a nice, wood, tongue and groove, yellow floor, is going to have a lot more reflection. In the pit is one thing. I'm not sure how that would work. Reflected light in the pit would just go up out of the pit. It wouldn't necessarily come back down.
I'm not working on a pit, and I've also got the reflective surface of the shell above me.
Right. So in a shell, that's what I was going to say. In a shell environment, we do a lot of high schools with shells. The shell is a light material, and so you will have reflection coming back down. So you put enough on the floor, you'll get a good ambient level of light. Although in the most recent shells that we do, like with Wenger, they have a nice fixture that fits inside the shell ceiling pieces, which can take care of the top light. But I will say this about the levels. It is a moving target in this sense. First of all, you got the eye, aging eye. Is the musician 20 years old or 60 years old? You got all these factors that are variables. But one big one is, does anybody want to take a guess? We'll put this up on the website for people. What is moonlight? How many foot candles or lux do you get from a full moon on a clear night? Most people with reasonably good vision can read a book under the light of a full moon. So if you take that number and you say to somebody, well, you should be able to read your music if it's unshadowed, which is a very important point, with that much light reflecting off the page. Black ink on a white background or a ochre yellow background. But I'll say something interesting. There's a psychological phenomenon. I once had a situation where the orchestra was complaining. This was under a shell, but it had dark lighting. Like the orchestra would using lights for scenes that were set with the shell had a projection on it. There was the lights were down, follow spots were used. And so the producer said, the orchestra, they're freaking out about the light that you have. It's changing. It's this and it's that. And I said, okay, I'll do a little prop work. So I took my light meter. I made a big thing about it. I went out, walked among the orchestra, put my light meter on the pointed towards the light that was incident on the sheet music, made a big thing and looked at it and went, yeah, that's good. That's good. I went around and did this performance, right, of measuring the light. And after that, everybody felt good and they were able to see. One of the most difficult things to measure is adaptation. And you guys know what that is. You can start a light level at a certain place, and then 15 minutes later, you can see all kinds of detail, and you didn't make the light any brighter. So what happened? So your brain adapts to the light level, right? It is very difficult to measure and anticipate. So, and everything that IES tells you, and the recommendations that they make are based on human studies, and they're guidance. Right, their guidance, and you should follow it, of course, but it's all usually a range from X to X plus, right, in terms of what the recommendation is on the human studies. But what happens, it's dangerous, to Ellen's point about asking, is there a number? When these numbers get put into municipal codes, then you sort of take the discretion of the designer and the human out of it. But if you're lighting a toilet at Grand Central Station, there's going to be a code in New York City, and you better have X number of lumens right, on that horizontal plane, uniformly lit because that's what the code says. And I'm not saying that that's bad or that it's sort of there's a lot of factors going on there.
One can argue on whether you want bright light or dim light in a toilet at Grand Central Station. Sometimes what you don't see is a good thing. Okay.
Now you're being funny.
All right, Alan from Chicago. Oh, by the way, this question actually is quite timely because last week we talked a little bit about gobos, and this has to do with gobos. So here we go. Alan from Chicago asks, I was designing a show a few weeks ago which included a very dark and dappled nighttime atmosphere. I used a lot of breakups to give texture to the stage, and it looked great. But the director kept asking for more light on the actors' faces. However, whenever I added front light, it washed out all the texture. Are there any techniques that could help me keep the quality of the atmosphere while adding visibility to the actors' faces? There are. Okay? There are some techniques. And I'm sure my brothers and sisters will have others to talk about, but let me just give you 4. First of all, one thing you could do is instead of just giving the actor front light, you could add little gobos in the front light and have a soft gobo wash that will give you much more frontal angle, and then it's not maybe as high as the other gobos coming in there, so that you can illuminate and activate the skin. And speaking of activating the skin, it's really important that whatever that color is that you're using actually does activate the skin, but still blends in to everything around it, all the gobos around it. Sometimes, like, let's say you're using, I'm just going to throw some numbers out. Let's say you have a gobo wash or backlight using like R68, okay? And you have all these gobos. Well, you're not going to want like an RO2 front light with gobos in it because it's going to look really bad. So you want to go to something like a Lee 200, something into more of a reddish blue type of lighter saturation of light for that. And make sure it's all soft, okay? So that's one way you can do it. Another technique you can use, and this is what I use a lot in many of these situations, I will have a series of head highs and shin kickers. And this is for plays, this is for musicals, it's for operas. It doesn't have to be for dance. I'll just shoot them across the stage and cut everything off the floor, because even side light will activate the light on the face. And if it's not hitting the floor, it's not screwing up your atmosphere. So at very low levels, you can have this system of side light coming across the stage that will activate the actors' faces. And you'd be surprised how effective that is. And usually a combination of those two would work really well too. You had a little front light and then you had these side lights. It looks fantastic. It's a great angle. It really cuts people out. I always love that. Another technique is selective visibility moving around the stage. Okay, that means if an actor's moving around, you're able to cue it in such a way so that those areas of front light and or shin kickers or whatever you're using, head highs, are changing as the actor moves around the stage. And that helps a great deal. And that's another technique that I use. And finally, when all else fails, a really nice subtle follow spot works as well. Again, using the same type of color that we talked about earlier, a lighter version of what the atmosphere color is, but cut just to the head and the chest and very soft. And that way the actor can move wherever they want to go. And that little follow spot, which may only be at 20 or 30%, is activating the face. So those are the techniques that I use. How about you guys?
Well, I think those are all good. What I'm thinking of is that song, What a Wonderful World. I mean, in a few more years, we're going to have a transmitter on every actor, and there's going to be a moving light, that subtle shot of Zeffirelli follow spot at 10% on their faces as they move about the stage. But I like your idea. I like your idea a lot of the side light. I think just blasting front light in. It's just a bad idea. The director says, I need a little bit more light. Well, he or she didn't necessarily mean ugly light from the front.
Well, the other thing is that the front light, I think, is going to really destroy that dark, textured atmosphere that the designer is going for. The side light might be a little more subtle.
Well, I think David has a point. If you know you're going to do this shadowy, dark, gobo-y, whatever scene, then you're going to have to design into your show something to support that, not just find it accidentally.
Yeah, because you can't just like hang a bunch of booms
Right.
at the last
And you
minute.
kind of hope it's going to work. I hope the box takes care of this. I hope the front of house takes care of this. That's not the way it works.
You know, Steve brings up a really good point, and that is that it's a lot easier to do this before than after, because there's nothing wrong with hanging a light and you never use it.
Absolutely.
But there is something wrong with needing a light and not having it because you didn't hang it.
I tell my students all the time, the light will not take it personally if you do not turn it on.
That's right. The electricians may, but the light won't.
No, but in Broadway, the producer might.
That's true, too. Oh, okay. Anyway, so it's time for our sponsor. So, Stan, you want to do the lead-in?
Well, I would love to do the lead-in because, you know, you're listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers and Sisters. And Light Talk this week is sponsored by
the Cheeky Rigger of Sheffield. The Cheeky Rigger of Sheffield introduces how to say your design really sucks without saying it, a British user manual. We've all been there. You're in a production meeting, someone unveils their latest design, and deep in your heart, a small voice whispers, "Wow, this is not good." And sometimes, despite your better judgment, you turn to your colleague and say, "Hey, your design really sucks." Then it happens, that awkward silence. But, you know, sometimes honesty is necessary. The question is, how do you say your design really sucks without being a complete jerk? Well, it's all about tone. Tone is everything. With the right inflection, you can say your design really sucks and still get invited to lunch. For example, "Hey, your design really sucks." Translation, "I feel for you, but maybe there's hope." Now change the tone. "Hey, your design really sucks." Translation, "This is so terrible, I'm embarrassed for both of us." So how do you deliver brutal honesty with style? Just use a British accent. That's it. It's that simple. Let's face it, everything sounds better with a British accent. Someone could say,
"Your dog is hideous."
and you would not only thank them, you would buy them a beer. The British somehow managed to sound worldly, sophisticated, and slightly disappointed, but still rooting for you. So next time you need to deliver the bad news, try with a British accent. For example, with a British accent, you hear,
"Your design, whilst well executed, seems a tad bit unfortunate."
Translation, your lighting is bad, but in a polite, adorable way. You hear,
"Your design suggests you're a hard-working plonker."
Translation, clearly you've worked hard on something truly idiotic, but bless your heart. You hear,
"Your design is nothing but rubbish."
Translation, this is garbage, mate. Now on to the bonus round, add a Cockney accent for extra flair.
"Look here, Governor, that lighting is a bit of a mess, don't you think?"
Translation, your design really, really sucks. But suddenly, the critique sounds like it's coming from a charming chimney sweep from Mary Poppins. So no harm, no foul. Said to a Texan, even better. We will probably laugh and ask you to say it again. So remember, you do not need to sugarcoat the truth. Just summon up your best British accent, insult someone, and, wait for it, they will actually thank you. This has been a jolly old bit of advice from the Cheeky Rigger of Sheffield.
Lovely, absolutely lovely.
And now, back to the blokes at Light Talk.
Well, the sound of those ducks, monkeys, and iguanas having wild interspecies sexual experiences in the Light Talk petting zoo means that it's time for Let's Talk About. And today's Let's Talk About is all about light and health. Separating the bologna from the prime rib.
I take my bologna on white bread. with a little mayonnaise.
Oh,
And
I hope you don't go to the Carnegie Deli in New York and order that.
So, Stan, you have something to say about this?
Yeah, there's a lot of claims out there. I wanted to say, let's do the disclaimer. We are not experts in light and health. So don't take anything that we say and go to your bathroom and try this out on yourself.
certainly not your bathroom.
Certainly not in
Right.
that bathroom. We don't want to
Don't
be
put your bathrobe
responsible.
on. I mean, just like, okay. So I just know a couple of things from, I was delving into this. Let's just say there is a lot of really interesting research going on into light and health. There has been, honestly, a neglected field. When you think about all life on Earth is sustained by light. Light gives life, as GE used to say. Light is life. So it's kind of odd that we haven't really researched it. We certainly use it as a tool in from the X-rays of your lungs to all kinds of treatments or let's say diagnostic things. But here's a couple of cool things that I have on my list. I've got 3. If I've talked about it before, tough. You get to hear about it again. So we do things that we know that were discovered through real legitimate research. In your eye, you have something called IPRGC cells. It stands for inherently photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. And these were discovered, I think, by a British researcher. And what he discovered, there's about, I think, 40,000 of these, which is not a lot considering about 350 rods and like how many cones. But these particular cells, here's what's fascinating. They do not participate in vision at all. They do not give you any sight, but they're in your retina. What do? They know that they send a signal to every cell in your body about what time it is. And they regulate your circadian rhythms. This we know. The research has proven this out, which led to some other developments, like on your iPhone, if you have night shift, where you shift the color of your phone from the nice cool color it has during the day to the warm color, you're reducing the amount of low-frequency blue light because we know that the blue light stimulates the IPRGCs and tells your body, wake the hell up. So this is now being used on aircraft, right, with ambient light to sort of help manage jet lag. And so that's a real thing at Light and Health. The other thing that's real, and we know this to be true, is seasonal affective disorder, which happens in Scandinavia when you're at higher longitudes, closer to the poles. You have long periods of darkness and less periods of light, and people get depressed. And so we know that this is a real thing. Suicide rates goes up. And so supplementing the amount of light you're exposed to during the 24-hour period can manage seasonal affective disorder. That's pretty well accepted now. And we do know this. We know that daylight stimulates vitamin D uptake in the human body. So if you don't get enough exposure, you won't be healthy. And if you get too much exposure, you won't be healthy. So getting the right amount of daylight to stimulate vitamin D propagation. And by the way, that's what causes skin tone to change. If your ancestors grew up in a place with a lot of sun, your body develops a different coloration of the skin to modulate the amount of vitamin D uptake. And if your ancestors grew up in an area with very little sun, your skin lightens so that you can get the right amount of vitamin D uptake, and that has to be balanced. There's real research, and then there's pseudoscience. And so you have to sort of be able to recognize that something could start as pseudoscience and then becomes legitimized, right, as more research is done. So you just want to be careful in that. But I was asked to participate in a study that did receive real funding from a real institution. And when we used to fund things from real institutions,
Instead of taking the money
for
away.
scientific research, right? And this was an architecture firm that got this study. They had a theory that they wanted to prove, which was that the quality of lighting design in certain environments can affect health outcomes. And so we were, both myself and the acoustician were brought on to measure both light and sound in intensive care units at Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. This started right before COVID. And what was cool is they had the perfect situation. They had the old 1970s ICUs as they were designed then, and then they were going to open the new ICUs with a different design. And we could measure ambient sound, we could measure lumen intensity, we could measure color temperature shift, all of the criteria that you would measure. And we could do it in the old rooms and also do anecdotal human data gathering by talking to both the patients, how long their recoveries were, and the staff, and how burned out they were, or how much better they felt at work. And we started that, taking the measurements in the old ICUs, which was kind of difficult, let's say, to get the right light meters, put them in the rooms, turn them on, gather the data, download it, aggregate it. It's a lot of work. And then, unfortunately, COVID hit. And we never got to actually do the measurements in the new ICUs to sort of find out whether the different design, which was informed by, let's say, more modern approaches to lighting design in both the spaces for the staff and for the patients, never happened. So I don't have a result to share with you. And that's the kind of, we talk about research, not just somebody, with a website saying, how do you feel? And having human testimonials. You have to have really, a lot of data, a lot to gather. You have to have a baseline for which you start, which would have been the old ICUs, and then a baseline for the new ones, and study that over a period of months or years to really gather a lot of information. So there's some real stuff out there, and then there's a lot of, what I call early research that may or may not prove out to be legitimate.
There's also the lack of light that affects people, like people who have dementia and are called sundowners.
Oh, yes, sundowners.
And when the sun sets, they move into a deeper state of dementia and sometimes cannot control certain things like calling out names or speaking loudly or going into a serious depression because of the sundown effect.
Yeah, sundown is very real. They've studied that in institutions. They know at certain times of day, people who are either in assisted living or facilities get more agitated as the light changes. That has been very, very well documented. That's true, Ellen.
The other thing is that some people have done some things in like children's hospitals where they've done moving light patterns and moving animals and lights and stuff on the walls. And kids who are really sick and don't respond to much have really responded to this light and chase the animals on the walls and like to play with it and like the light and the shadow. So I think it's a science that really could be developed.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of work going on and we need more of it. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's interesting because, as you know, last week I opened a show here in LA, and it was a very interesting production, and I lit it in a kind of a very simple way. And I just decided to do a little contest, and I put it up on Light Talk and when it on the forum. And it's basically a screenshot from the MA3's color picker, and it had 11 colors in it. One's warm white, one's cool white, one's amber. There's R68, R80, sky blue, breakup green, lavender, sick yellow, open white, and 3200K. Those are the 11 colors. And I put it out there and I said, whoever can guess the show that has this color palette will win a Light Talk mug. Not ready for a dishwasher, of course. And believe it or not, the very first person who guessed was right. It was Dave LaChapelle, who is one of our listeners, and he guessed, he said, quote, "I'll take a guess, Our Town?" And I said, how the hell did you figure this out? And he said, well, my brother lit a production of Our Town a few months ago, and he had a very limited color palette as well. And I said, wow, awesome. And I basically wrapped up a mug and sent it to him. But isn't that cool? But the reason why I'm saying this at this moment is because one of the colors, which is sick yellow, is the color that I use when Emily goes back in time to her 13th birthday. Where she's in the graveyard and she goes back in time with the stage manager and she sees what it was like that day. And the director and I were talking about this because we were living in this sort of red-blue palette for like, I don't know, 30 minutes. And then we wanted to get something that was totally different. So we came up with this yellow color that was so shocking and so much contrast to the reddish bluish atmosphere that it was shocking. It was just incredible, but it was super saturated. And the scene takes about 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes, the scene happens. And after about 3 minutes, I'm feeling nauseous. I'm literally having a physical reaction to the light and the color. And this hadn't happened to me before. And I was trying to figure it out. And I'm thinking, this is really weird. I don't want the audience to feel this. So I ended up just taking a high side light, a mover from stage right, to cut in with some clear light from just one side to create contrast on that side of the stage. And it went away. The feeling of nauseousness went away. So I find that kind of interest. I don't know what that has to do with anything, to tell you the truth, but it certainly was a physiological reaction to the light and color.
Well, there's other reactions like that too, like people like me who cannot be in a room with strobe lighting, and it can induce an epileptic fit.
Right. Well, we've talked about that extensively, about what frequencies tend to stimulate that. But David, I would just add to that, and that's, not, it could be association, but I always like to think about the fact that your skin, doctors will tell you, is your largest organ. And it's the largest organ we have. And your skin is what feels the light and the frequency of the light. So it's not surprising to me. I mean, I don't know how much of it is an association to that color and sickliness, but that even if it is an association, the fact that you've stimulated that response in the human body, and everybody might not have it, but clearly two people did, and the director did. So, yeah, the power of light is still. Yeah, I think we're still at the early phases of figuring out, and now that we can control with such specificity, down to the individual frequency level, I think there's a lot of uncharted, unknown territory.
Certainly we can see this impact for about $50 and go buy yourself a daylight alarm clock and just watch how you wake up, and it changes. You don't have to have that horrible alarm going off, and it starts your day differently. The thing about Ellen's thing, though, I always find that kind of strange that we still have a problem with strobe lights. I mean, we can take that frequency out of a strobe light. There should never be a strobe light again that triggers an epileptic seizure. I was looking at what that frequency is, and console can pull that out.
Absolutely. And not the frequency of color, but the frequency of the flashing. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Right, well, we have that problem in our house. We have ceiling fans.
Right.
That's called the stroboscopic
somebody
effect.
Put ridiculous little LED baby lights on top of them, and when the lights are on and the fans are on, you go ballistic.
I want to call out a name. I want to drop a name here. My friend Naomi Miller of the Department of Energy, who I did a lot of research with, who just retired. I just heard from her that she's retired from the Department of Energy. Her area of research specifically over her career as a vision scientist and a great designer and wonderful person, Naomi Miller, at PPNL up in Portland. Her thing was about flicker, which is whether you strobe, flicker, and particularly when LEDs came on the market, how to avoid it, and the problems with it. Where it's not. I have a disc that General Electric made. It's like a top, and it's got little black and white squares on it. I can show it to you. I'll put a picture of it up on the Facebook page, and when you spin it, under whatever lighting condition you're in, it will tell you if you've got stroboscopic effect going on, even if you cannot visually see it, right? But it can still impact people who are susceptible to flicker, basically. And early dimmers used to have that problem, even on incandescent lamps. They had to kind of figure out a way to avoid that. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of really interesting stuff that's being done, but I think we just have to be careful about claims. People can make all kinds of claims. Claims have to be backed up with research that you can trust.
All right. Well, boy, this is one geeky episode. We gotta have to put a disclaimer. Beware to be geeked out, man.
That's the name of the episode. One geeky episode.
Geeking out on health.
Geeking out on health. So, Steve, please bring us back down to the low level of discussion that we are normally used to with your last question.
Well, we can rely on Todd from El Paso.
Todd from El Paso.
And he writes, be honest, is there any real difference between top shelf lighting consoles? Don't they all just do the same thing? Well, I think you've pulled the curtain aside and you have seen the wizard behind the curtain there. I think the first thing we have to define is what a top shelf console is.
Expensive.
What do you want? What do you want your console to do, Todd? The thing when people are picking consoles, it drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy. And I look at the forums, and I'm talking to you, forum, and there's somebody who writes in there and says, this console sucks. Anytime a console comes out and they update the software, the console sucks. It's going to be buggy. This console war that's going on when we start defining consoles, the other thing that bugs me a lot is when I see people on those same forums write, well, that's a theater console. What you need is a concert console. I mean, maybe that was true 20 years ago, but I stop. We just have entertainment consoles today. David's right, though. He does say they're expensive. So, Todd, do you have a budget in mind when you say top shelf? I think to purchase a decent entry-level console, let alone top-shelf console, you're probably at about $15,000. You're off to the races if you're gonna spend more than that. The big three, I think everyone's going to agree, the big three top-shelf consoles are going to be the Grand MA, the Hog 4, and the ETC EOS. And maybe top shelf, if you're a little limited, also means the Roadhog or the Geo at 5.
Well, there's also that new Ava Lights console.
Ava Lights is a great console. Also don't overlook that newly redesigned Verilight Neo X15. So it's more than just one console. It's how much console do you need? How much learning curve do you want when you buy this console? But to be fair, there are high school students who are running top shelf consoles every day of the week. They got the owner's manual out, they did the hard work, and they looked at it online, they looked at the videos. So even that, you can get around that these days. A top shelf console, certainly, if I'm looking at a top shelf console, I want it to be as easy and user friendly as possible. For me, what that means is multiple screens, easy way to find information. I don't want to have to change viewports. I just want to sit down and have my 87 screens all going and give me an easy to adjust workflow. Short answer, yeah. I think they're all the top shelf consoles are similar. They have similar ways of programming. They control similar amounts of equipment. It just comes down to cost versus result. How much console do you really need?
I think there's two others you should mention, the Obsidian and the Camsys.
As the high-end consoles.
But you're also seeing, particularly Grand MA, you're seeing that on Broadway now.
I ran an opera on a Grand MA. I do it all the time.
Yeah, my point is look at what the thing can do for you as opposed to saying, well, it's obviously... I mean, we don't say things like, well, that board is for ballet or that board is for straight plays or that board is for musical theater. I think that was a sales technique that was a really bad idea 20 years ago when people were trying to go against consoles and saying, well, that's a Metallica console, not a You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown console.
Right, but you don't need a Grand MA3 in your 99-seat black box theater.
And let's be honest, it's a lot easier to teach a student an EOS, that interface, than it is a Grand MA. And certainly easier than a Hog.
Right, but are you doing them a disservice by not teaching them the Grand MA?
I think the best service is to have 2 or 3 different consoles in your theaters so that they get to learn all 3 interfaces.
That's in a teaching environment if you can afford it.
Right.
I think the transportation metaphor works here. It's like whether it's a car or a plane You can get there in a one-engine Piper, you can get there in an A380, and they all have different purposes. At one point, for example, we were feeling the pressure at UF when I was still teaching to buy a Grand MA. And so I put out a question, and all of my alumni who were out in the field, who were working on all kinds of consoles, they all got back to me and said, do not buy a Grand MA stamp. And I said, why? It's what everybody's using. Don't you think the students need to learn it? And they said, but at your school, you don't have a huge rig of moving lights. It's not necessary. Let them learn the software. Do it in previs. You don't need to own that thing. And I took them at their word. So I think it's, and we specify a lot of consoles for various theaters, whether, like, for example, let's just contrast a high school theater, probably going to get something like an EOS or a HOG, right? Cost-wise, it'll serve the purpose, and they're pretty well used in the industry. But for the Seminole tribe of Florida, in their theater, their AV, they have a whole production team, and they said, we are Grand MA. That's what we use. So that's what they're going to get. Even if the theater that we're doing doesn't need one, because it's not going to do a big rig like their casino spaces, but that's what they're comfortable with. So that's what we're going to get them.
Yeah, because the same technicians will probably be using them.
That's
the
right.
Same programmers.
Exactly right.
Absolutely.
Exactly right.
Makes sense.
And are you getting a light, or are you getting the full Grand MA?
We're not that far along yet. We're still in schematic.
Well, probably you'll get a light.
Probably.
And then all of a sudden you're competing with EOS or Geo or even Ion. So, I mean, the light is quite a bit of console.
I just think that these boards are for different purposes. And then you just got to look at what you're doing with it and what you need in case it breaks, because they do break. All consoles break. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tell us that once again you spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website at lighttalk.org and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, you will be dealing with me, Snoot, from the Snoot Group. And you don't want to with me, because I will make your life unbearably miserable as I drain the retirement funds from these Lumen bozos.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers and Sister, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, St. Bart, and the Republic of Texas.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more lighting shenanigans and serve you a double helping of our casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Goodbye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye.